welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Shannon Phillips.
I'm Leah Ward.
And Annalise is off this week, but that's okay. We have a very special guest and one, Kyla Ronellenfitsch, who is joining us today. Kyla is a pollster, data scientist, who's worked in Canada and the United States, and she's also the president of Relay Strategies, and we're very pleased she can join us today. Welcome, Kyla.
Hi, Kyla.
Great to be with you.
So we are in Victoria. Leah and I are, because it's BC Budget Day, which we're not going to talk much about, I think.
There's not much to say.
No, there's not a lot to say, honestly. They're trying to position themselves for economic growth, I think is what we can say about this budget, and it's a tough situation.
I think they did I could say they did a good job of sort of softening the ground, like a lot of pre-interviews and sort of like premonitions about a bad news budget. And of course that it always helps when you exceed or don't meet negative expectations. So
yeah, they did a good job of that. They did a good job, I think, of saying, like we have a growth plan, like a plan to grow the economy. But we'll see how it goes. But of course, lots of things I think got overshadowed by the events in Tubler Ridge last week, and it's being out here in BC. You really kind of get that. I think it will seize the business of government for some time. I think that's fair to say, and that's probably a good thing because I don't know about you folks. I've been thinking about it, and I don't know when the right time to talk about it is. But obviously, it wasn't last week. But I've been thinking a lot about mental health services, like not just in urban centers, but in rural centers too. And I think almost everyone knows someone who is, or has a family member or has a friend of a family or something who is deeply troubled and just does not get the help they need, especially in rural areas. So I don't know when the time to talk about that is, but
I mean, we can talk a little bit about it. There's probably things that'll come up as time passes and more is revealed about what happened. I think, I've been away from the kids in my life since that event happened, and I'm spending a lot of time thinking about the parents who lost kids and how impossible it is to imagine what they're going through. And I'm also thinking a lot about the trans community right now, who are experiencing a huge backlash and violence because of right-wing disinformation and campaigning to make this an issue that targets trans people. Mm-hmm. But to your point about mental health, the whole thing is just deeply tragic.
It really is. So yeah, Kyla, that's the view from out west here. And we're going to keep it out west. We're going to kind of talk a little bit about...
There's nothing but good views in the west.
Well, we are at the very further point of west here in Victoria, but we're going to move to Alberta a little bit. And well, first, we're going to look at the polling and issues around three things that Kyla's done some work on and that just so happen to dovetail nicely with some of our headlines this week. Immigration, where the young kids are at these days, and another terrible, no good, bad week for Pierre Poilievre. But first, apparently we have to talk about the Separatists every week, every time us Albertans open our mouths. We can't not talk about them. And one story that I felt like people didn't see, I think it was because it came out on the day that the Prime Minister and the other leaders went out to BC. It was actually really shocking, and it was reported by NBC News. And essentially it said that Separatist organizer Dennis Modry said he attended 3 meetings with the U.S. State Department on April 22nd, September 29th, and December 16th. He said there's another meeting in the works for this month. That the meetings took place at the State Department's headquarters in Washington. The meetings covered what would happen in a potential transition to a country, with discussions around border security, the Canadian pension plan, taxes, national debt, the process for converting U.S. currency, a $500 billion line of credit if necessary. I thought we were going to be so rich. I'm not sure why we would need a line of credit. And according to Mr. Dennis Modry, Alberta will also need its own military. And would the U.S. be willing to work with Alberta in the development of an Alberta military? So that's mildly frightening.
I don't know what you mean. It's business as usual. These are all normal things, normal headlines.
We were wackos for being concerned about this. Isn't that what other headlines said since we last chatted?
Yeah, hissy fit. So, Kyla, tell me about the hissy. Jamil Javani, of course, for those who have been living under a rock, talked about how Canadians were throwing a hissy fit for being worried about the trade relationship. Tell us about how that's been kind of going over, and if people have been putting that together with some tolerance for separatism, because I think certainly in Alberta they are.
Yeah, I mean, to the hissy fit comments specifically, I mean, I don't know if we yet know how it's going over. Like, obviously, we know in the media and how it's being portrayed. I know how I assume it will be portrayed, assuming people hear about it, right? Like, it was my mom. It is my mom's birthday today, so I was chatting with her right before this and doing the classic Politico mom check of like,
Yeah.
oh well,
Moms and cab drivers.
have you heard this story? Yeah, and she hadn't, but who knows? The other moms are maybe she was sick, so maybe she's catching up. But the idea of down or putting a label like hissy fit on how Canadians are reacting to this, I really can't think of anything that is more tone deaf. Like I feel like Canadians are feeling, and most Canadians are feeling a sense of, righteous indignation, righteous anger. And to have that be dismissed, not just it would be bad enough if it was dismissed as at home, if it was talked about as a hissy fit. Doing that in the US on right-wing media is politically insane. I don't know what he could have possibly been thinking. He was already on thin ice, and then to cross that line, he kind of got away with it okay up until that point, right? Like his trip to the US, I feel like there was a mix of interpretations, obviously a lot of criticism as well, but it was not so bad at the outset, and then to do this is truly phenomenal.
But do you think there's consequences for Poilievre's handling of it? I mean, he sort of tisk wag fingered at Giovanni and, explained to him that Canadians are, we're actually kind of upset and actually have a good reason to be. But do you think, given what we're seeing in polling, or maybe what you're seeing, that'll be enough for Canadians?
Again, going back to, I don't know if this will break through entirely, but it was an insufficient response. Like the idea, one, that you have to explain to someone on your team, actually, I hate to catch you up on the last almost year and a half, but Canadians are quite pissed about this. Like that is an insane thing to have to catch up one of your, quite prominent members of your caucus on. And then to just, it kind of reads like a conversation that you have with a child that like actually it's quite rude to like tell that person they look fat. Like that is kind of the feeling of it, is like, this should go without saying. This is a crazy thing to say. And so no, I don't think that it felt forceful enough, but it comes down to what we keep seeing over and over again, that if I put myself in their shoes as strategists and where I see the data, like they are in a very difficult position. And that's why it's been so difficult for them to navigate it, is because they have a contingent of their base who probably does think that we're kind of throwing a bit of a hissy fit. Or we are, they would, if not for tariffs, maybe be okay with Trump and are good with lots of parts of his agenda. And so it's a complex story to tell, right? And so how strongly, what we've seen over and over again is Poilievre is not going to go strongly, not be terribly strongly critical about Trump, and not be, he's not going to butt heads with anyone that is in that further right group of his coalition.
So, I think we kind of got going on on a side quest of Giovanni, but I do think it comes back to, are we being a bit too, I'll use this word advisedly, histrionic about, the separatist threat, the threat to our economy from Trump, because it's all of a piece, right? Or it feels like it's of a piece. Certainly, separatist discourse feels like it's of a piece with kind of MAGA priorities, and nowhere is that more the case than in immigration. The separatists are talking about how they want control over immigration, and Danielle Smith talks about this too. That's sort of the sanitized version. But what they say out loud, the separatists, in a much less sanitized version, is that Albertans are being replaced by immigrants. There's been an anti-hate network complaint from a town hall that Mitch Sylvester and Jeffrey Rath did. They're two of the Alberta Prosperity Project, Stay Free Alberta. organizers. They also said that Christianity will soon be a crime in Canada. White Albertans shouldn't have to apologize for themselves. That I mean, the replacement one is straight out of white replacement theory, right? And then in 2 to 3 years following statehood, they also said their vision of Alberta is a place where citizenship rights are granted only to people who are born here. So this is very MAGA, right? It's straight out of the MAGA playbook, and certainly it gets some traction here in Alberta. But I think even in Alberta, that stuff is pretty far outside widely held views. But I'm interested in what data is telling us about immigration, Kyla, and about some of these Trumpier visions of immigration.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a starting point, it's really, I mean, this is such a challenging issue, but it's one that it is worth taking the care to really unpack, because I think most or a lot of Canadians fall, I would say that this is the anti-immigrant sentiment or concerns about immigration in this country is, I would say, like a wide spectrum, but that a lot of people fall onto. So concerns about immigration are quite widespread. Like, I can't tell you how often I've been doing focus groups with young people, young first generation immigrants of all ages, where I'm talking to center left voters, like people that would be progressives, right? And they bring it up, but it comes up in very different ways. So you have the stuff that you're talking about, which is like a very xenophobic, classically racist point of view. And then you have a lot of people that are talking about immigration as like a logistics problem. Like,
Right.
the Trudeau government allowed in a lot of people, and we already have a shortage of housing and doctors and all of these different things. And they will go out of their way to talk about, like, it's not,
Yeah.
we are a country of immigrants. They are proud of immigration. They want, social cohesion and harmony and all of those things. But it's like, literally, how do we manage
Yeah.
that? And I think this relates to, and we can go back to how this manifests, I think, on part of the conservative spectrum. But I think this general feeling like things got out of control around immigration, like that feeling of a lack of control is deeply corrosive on immigration, on public safety, on cost of living, like any of these issues. As soon as people start to feel like things have gotten out of control, like that is scary. And that is where you are probably not going to like the electoral consequences. Like, it's hard to turn the dial back on that.
Do you think that progressives have it right in how they're talking about this, if at all? Because
Are we talking are we talking about it? Like, I feel
the only real response that I hear out of liberal New Democrat-y type, either commentators or in the sort of official discourse, is we are a country of immigrants, and we're gonna make sure we get the logistics right. Like, is that the right place actually to land? Because that's the core of the issue for people.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think that Canadians look at these through a couple different vantage points, which is like pre-Justin Trudeau immigration, which was always great and perfect and all of those things. And now it is part of our national story. And the idea of us being a multicultural country is a really compelling reason to love and appreciate our country. Like, it is, the mosaic versus the melting pot, all of that. Like, that is a core part of Canadian identity that I don't think is something that has become less real, but there's also a recent history. So I think sometimes talking about like the broad scale, like, it kind of misses the point to a certain extent, which is like the problem, I think, for a lot of people is viewed as something a little bit more recent and a temporary or a period of things getting out of control and things looking very differently than they once did. And so I think on a lot of these things, like downplaying someone's concerns about a thing that is valid, like I think we saw this and we saw this in the US around the border.
Yeah.
And you could have disagreements on like what that solution would be, but denying that it is a problem is never a good thing. And especially when people are like up in arms about an issue, to be like, oh, actually, no.
Yeah.
There's never a well, actually. That's not good political communications ever.
So, like in the States, you see Dems kind of throwing Biden under the bus now. Is that something that people can do with Trudeau here? And does that mean a head nod for people?
I mean, Kind of. I don't know. I do think it has been kind of, to a certain extent, we've been fortunate, or maybe there's been, in general, some like pretty solidly, like I feel like the issue has been dealt with. There's been moments where I've been really worried that, immediately after the election, I would say Poilievre started putting immigration into his litany of issues in a way that I was like, okay, we're going there, like
That's
that.
what
And he was doing it in a way that I thought was like very strategically smart,
yeah.
which was
Well, because it
focusing
was
on kids and focusing on temporary foreign
PFWs.
workers.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they're saving it again for later or if they backed off, because it is explosive, right? Like you can't put that genie back in the bottle. So I don't we've
It's
lucked out a
interesting,
little
isn't
bit,
it?
so it's not a
He's
huge part
backed
of our
off.
narrative. Yes, I think, I would say that he has. And again, maybe it'll reemerge, but it's hard to say whether or not, we've dealt with it fully. Well, I just think we haven't been talking about it. So if this was the topic of the day, then yes, Carney would be talking about all of the failures of, or should be talking about all of the failures of the past government. And this was a problem at the hands of Justin Trudeau. And these are all the ways that we reined it in and have brought back calm and control and, constraints over the system in a way that feels pretty Carney aligned, right? Like he is the reasonable person. He is the calm presence or whatever. So, but I don't think that he's actually had to, there's obviously been some communication around it, but not intensively.
One of the things I think about, and I don't have a solution to this, Kyla, maybe you do, but if we stop ourselves at sort of refuting the reasons for the problem, I think to your point, we're kind of still validating that like immigrants themselves are part of the problem. Why there are fewer jobs available to young people, why healthcare is harder to get, why housing remains unaffordable. And so, to validate that, which is not untrue, we still direct the blame. Even if we're attempting to sort of say that that's Trudeau's fault, it is. It lands on immigrants.
Yeah.
And so when I think about like what would it take for progressives to challenge that overall narrative, I think we need to be more creative than to argue around the mechanics of how the problem arose. And I don't know if you're seeing anything in the data that would suggest an opening into a new sort of narrative frame for that kind of argument. But yeah, I worry a little bit that we're actually reinforcing the same fears. And what I've sort of noticed, and in things that I've come across, fear actually brings people into more conservative thinking. So it makes us sort of pull inward and want to protect our own and ourselves. And where we see progressive arguments do better is if we can tap into defiance. And again, like I don't have the answer on this particular issue, but I am curious to explore what it would look like to move away from fear-based narratives into something that would be a little bit more helpful for our side.
Yeah, I would say I've seen a couple of things that I think are interesting. I've not tested them myself, so I'm not saying this as like a recommendation. This is, I think, the path. Like, I don't know. I always feel like I need to see the data until I feel like fully confident. But I think there was, during the campaign, on the times that the prime minister did talk about immigration, he spoke of it as like an unfairness in multiple respects and an unfairness to the people that we are allowing into the country, right? Like they are also coming here with a promise, and this is also an unfair way to live, right? Like they come here, think of all of these students that come with a promise of a good education and the opportunity that comes with it after, and finding that not to be the case, and also that they can't afford to live here when they come here. And I think that there's something to that feels more less in the hands of that individual person, right? And approaching it with some empathy. And then what I've also seen be interesting is talking about the corporate interest, the corporate element of this, right? Is like the business community, and they still are, fighting tooth and nail for this program and
Oh,
its
yeah.
use. And, let's have a conversation about the price of labor in this country. And I feel like that's, that is probably my guess around where there's a strong progressive argument.
We'll talk about this a little bit more in our next topic, but I just want to remind people that we were talking to Kyla Ronellenfitsch. She is an amazing pollster. She does both quantitative and qualitative work, and has a great Substack, which is just under your name, Kyla, or Kyla.
Yeah,
Anyway,
relay with Kyla Ronellenfitsch.
okay. And she publishes a lot of her work there as well. You've done some polling on young people,
Mhm.
and some analysis on the differences between young Canadians and young Americans. And I want to talk a little bit about this because, Poilievre really put a lot of his stock in the young vote. And, to which us old progressives kind of at the time were like, ha ha ha, ha. Best of luck with those turnout rates. You're much better off with older voters because they turn out to vote in much higher numbers. But he really did make a play for them. They've invested organizing resources, like to their credit, right? Where it does seem like other parties are kind of still flailing about going, how do we reach people? How do we reach people? The Conservatives are actually doing it, leaving aside the merits of the content when they get there. But they are actually doing the thing. But I'm interested in, is it working? Is that real? This pop up among, Gen Z, especially Gen Z men in Canada, and kind of where are we at in Canada on what we would call essentially like younger voters. I'm going to assume like under 25, or are you taking it more at like an under 29 kind of thing?
I often look at under 35, but
Right.
some
Okay,
pollsters will
so
look
that's
at
young. Yeah.
under 30. But I mean,
Yeah.
depending on where you are, I feel like that's either young or not.
We're still not young. Okay.
Or yeah, a yeah, Humboldt, Saskatchewan, 35. I'm 35 and from Humboldt, Saskatchewan originally. So I say this to allow myself to be young forever. It looks different in Humboldt than it does in Ottawa.
Totally. So tell me, like, where are the youngs at these days?
Yeah. So I think I'm currently working on an article on this that includes like a lot of writing all in caps lock. That's just like, we are getting this wrong. Like, I'm so sick of this narrative that young people are like overwhelmingly conservative. Like, I feel like this argument sort of, it took hold about a couple years ago, before, when Justin Trudeau was still prime minister of the country. And that's when it would have looked like an absolute genius play, right? Like, Poilievre, one, he was leading with everyone. So we focus so much on like how unusual it is that young people are also moving, but like, they're also voters. They're also responding to the circumstances. Why wouldn't they move? And also, if we looked at, young men, particularly at that point in time, like some polling that I had from September 2024 had Poilievre literally winning a majority of men, 52% of men. And he would have also been leading among young women. But this dynamic has completely changed, and our kind of the way that we talk about it hasn't really. And part of that, I think, is we can read like endless articles about the rightward shift among Gen Z, and a lot of this is like kind of American content, right? Which is probably not even generalizable there, but you find the internet serves up all of the like tasty treats of public opinion and all the way it manifests. So we all latch on to like this trend that is happening. And it could just be, in the broad scheme of things, niche, still potentially very problematic, but niche in broad terms. And like what we see today is the Liberals leading, leading among young voters. It kind of depends on the pollster and depends on the period of time, but at least by a few points, if not, deeply competitive. Like, it just is not this dynamic where they're leading double digits and leading among young women, which everyone, of course, was very, I don't know, depends who you were, disturbed by, fascinated by, what have you. So it's, to go back to your question of whether or not this was a good strategy, 2 years ago it was a brilliant strategy, and it probably still is to a certain extent. Like, is he creating lifelong conservatives? Would they have actually been at 15% and not 33? Like, all of these things are kind of a little bit unknowable, and he definitely has, if you go to one of his rallies, like, he's definitely fostering some affinity that probably didn't exist for the Conservative Party before him. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but this idea that this is just an overwhelmingly conservative and like social conservative generation is just not the case.
Why do you think that young people are comforted by the Liberal message or movement, I would say lack of, on on the affordability stuff. I mean, I think there's a general understanding of the last election of being sort of two main ballot box questions. If you were young, the ballot box question was on affordability and housing. And if you were older, the ballot box question was, Trump. And older people tend to vote more. So this sort of it went that way. But we're seeing, like Abacus recently is showing sort of a real closing of the gap on the affordability question. And I'm curious if you know anything about why that's the case, especially for young people.
Yeah, I mean, I think I actually think there's a couple things. So one is we have an expectation, well, for us who are obsessed with politics, we have an expectation of voters in general that they care about anything, that they are actually coming from this with like a reasoned point of view. Which is not to downplay that they are unreasonable. It's just that we are weird and we pay a lot of attention to politics. And so I would describe young people, this would extend into other age groups as well, but for young people, I would describe them as more disillusioned than like passionate. Like they, maybe they're moving on. I think if they're moving with Carney on cost of living, they're probably just moving on Carney. Like some of these things are very related to one another.
This man seems competent.
Yes. And I think he's doing a kind of a good job. And like,
throw some clips onto that speech.
But they're not boomers, like who are enthusiastic and love Carney. Like these look different. One of the most, I had done a huge study, so like over 2,000 young voters in November. And I had done kind of like the cross section of people who have of their impressions of both Poilievre and of Mark Carney. And this is one of the most interesting data points that came out of it, is that a plurality of young people are actually kind of fine with either of them. And we think of everyone as super partisan. So it's like 44% of people say they have a favorable or neutral opinion. Neutral is a key part here, but of both Poilievre and Carney. Like they are not a hyper partisan generation. And I think, again, going back to the American example, the environment is obviously much more polarized in the US, but there's also a reason for young people to be extremely politically engaged in the US in a different way, and particularly on the left, right? Whereas that leftward, like I describe it as like, if you are a young voter, and this is like very hard news for a New Democrat, but if you are a young voter in Canada, one, your only real political experience is Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh. And you've kind of had your progressive itch scratched. Like they are, that feeling is very different from the US, where they just keep being disappointed and keep being also are like losing bodily autonomy, but are dealing with a dynamic where Donald Trump is their president and where the Democratic Party never listens to young people and the kind of people that they want to be led by. And so I think that is very different, and we cannot one-to-one this generation across the border.
Yeah, it really seems like 10 years of declining relevance of the federal party, and then culminating in the confidence and supply, which essentially hitched them to the Trudeau brand. It really just kind of consigned them to irrelevance at a time when young people were just starting to figure out like kind of whose values I support, what are my friends doing, like what is, if at all, if we're talking at E-3 about who we're going to vote for, kind of what the main frames are. With the New Democrats kind of wrote themselves out of that with the confidence and supply, I feel like, because they were just hitched to a really unpopular guy. And the only time it became decoupled was when kind of, then Trump overwhelmed, tsunamied everything. And so there's no vantage point, right? There's no point at which they went, oh, okay, the New Democrats were relevant. They were putting forward something that I liked, that I didn't have to look around Justin Trudeau to see, right? I couldn't see a Jack Layton, and I kind of going, okay, like here's another way of thinking about Canadian politics. It seems like that has been a lost decade. And as a result, we're sort of trending towards a two-party system, at least that's something that jumped out from your work that I saw in young voters, is that they don't even know that they can't spell NDP. They don't know that it exists.
Well, and I don't want to be like, I mean, I don't know. It could be totally doom and gloom. It could potentially not be. Young voters are, if anything, and this was always the case, fickle as hell. So so with a compelling leader, with, like, they are the most likely to move in a big way. And there could be, there could be obviously there could be discontent with Carney's government, and what will be the solution to that? I don't know. But right now, I think it goes back to one of your earlier points, Shannon, which was when people are feeling anxious or starting from a point of fear, then they often will latch on to more conservative. Maybe Leah said this as I'm saying it. I'm like, I think it was Leah.
I would never say something so smart.
Yeah. But that they will revert to kind of a more conservative feeling or a conservative ideology. Not that I'm like describing Mark Carney as a conservative, but like he feels like a safe space, I think.
Yeah.
To give one anecdote, I was doing for the study, doing a ton of in-depth interviews with young people. And this is literally like case study of one. It could just be this one person, but I was interviewing an Indigenous woman from, I think, Kamloops, who was like a liberal voter, but, not particularly engaged. And I was asking her about pipelines, and she was like, I don't know, like the economy. And I was like, oh, okay, like this would make Justin Trudeau's head literally explode, right? Like that as a, an emblem of a voter is just like, it feels unimaginable 10 years ago, right? And I think it just goes back to, what trade-offs will we make and what will we sacrifice in periods of time where there's truly a sense of desperation. Like the feeling that young voters have around the economy and their economic fortunes is so depressing, and for reason, right?
Yeah. Well, having done politics in Alberta, I will reliably report back to you that pipelines equals economy. And so that voter was bang on. That is the sophistication of the analysis, right? And that's how people think about it. So you just have to kind of, chart your way through it. And Trudeau understood that too, because that's why he bought one for $30 billion.
Kenny understood it too, and I'll never forget the idiocy. What's the word there?
Idiocy. I like your version. One more syllable.
It was so frustrating to see his podium art say like jobs, pipeline, economy. He just took people's top 3 issues and plastered them on his campaign art that became his slogan and nailed it. Like,
yeah, that was great.
That was exactly the part. It was like,
I was going to say, I've seen worse slogans. Like, at least it's direct. I don't know.
For our hearts over those slogans.
Yeah. But just write the issue set on the podium is apparently how you do it. So, like, what breaks through, Kyla, is another thing, because, like, especially us olds, we spend a lot of time wringing our hands about how to reach the youngs. And so you did a lot of these individually directed interviews, which I think are really interesting way to do kind of qualitative research, because they're kind of like a focus group of one, but then you have a whole bunch of tools that you can put them all together, which I love. Because I find, maybe, and the last time I said this to you, you kind of pushed back on me, so I'm going to say it again. That sometimes in focus groups, you get like a bit of a herd thing happening, right? Where one person brings something up, and so the rest of them go, "Oh yes, they're right. I didn't think of that," and then off they go. So
I push back on that. That's 100% true.
Okay, maybe it was somebody else.
No, there's absolutely. That's why I do a lot of individual interviews, is because there's a lot of groupthink, right? And I want to know, if I see a trend, I want it to be a trend. Like I want to know, okay, I heard this a few times.
Yeah, so I love that, and I'm wondering what else that you kind of saw that punches through to people that might give us some clues on how to reach them.
Well, a lot of people in politics won't like the answer, which is like, you have to be interesting. Like people are, like young people. Okay, so I had asked about sources of information, like what are young people consuming? Obviously, they're super on social media, but only a quarter of people say that their young people say that their algorithms commonly feed them information about politics, which is wild because they're not reading the paper. So they just aren't seeing it. So the way that we are consuming information is scroll, 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 scroll And even for myself, it's like my politics, like something pops up and then the next thing is about heated rivalry and then the next thing is about cooking and then the next thing, and you have to compete in that space. And most of our politicians in our political parties aren't even on TikTok, like giving up that entire space, which I think is, I mean,
Insane.
I'm not a security expert, but I think it's just from a persuasion point of view is crazy.
I don't understand why we can't afford a whole, box of burner phones. Like just reach the people. Anyway, I'll leave that aside.
100%. And they have all our data anyway. Anyways, whatever. That's a separate thing. We're really out of my area of expertise, but I just find it's like crazy.
I just don't understand why you'd give up a whole
platform, and which is primarily I mean, obviously a lot of young men are on it as well, but it skews female. So then if we're not on TikTok, then we're on YouTube and Instagram. Instagram also skews female and YouTube skews male, but YouTube seems, well, at least on the left, seems very hard for us to break through on it. Like the conservatives do it extremely well.
Yep.
And so like my stupid answer about what breaks through is like, the thing that the prime minister, you don't always get an opportunity to do the heated rivalry thing, but like that broke through. Like some of that kind of stuff is like, okay, we need to get comfortable with like a subliminal message. Like what would people have learned from Mark Carney from that is like, oh, he's tolerant. Oh, he's, all of these other things that are,
he likes the thing
character.
I like.
He likes the thing that I like. He
can
interact with it and engage with it. Right. And then you see like Poilievre does his own versions of that, which is like, he's, doing CrossFit and stuff like that, but he's also in those spaces, which I like mock as like a 35-year-old woman. I don't really mock it as like a strategist fully, maybe a little bit, but you're going into spaces where people are and that they would actually come across. And so it's like, you kind of have to do the things that a lot of, especially I would say in the progressive space where we're a bunch of like, front of the class people, right?
Plan.
Yes, like it's beneath me.
Ideas.
It's beneath me to not sound perfect all the time and to not let me show you how smart I am. And that is criminal. Like I think of this often of like I think of this especially in the American context. Like I think our cultures are very different around this. Like I think you can only be so edgy to a certain extent in Canadian politics. We have a stronger mocking, I think, than maybe in the US. But like I'm just like they professionalize themselves into fascism. Like they just were so they're allergic to saying the thing, right? Like, or to being interesting or to, obviously everyone now in the US is like swearing gratuitously, but like, and so now it's cheesy, but just like speaking like a human, speaking like a person, going into spaces, going on podcasts that you think are, below you. Like that is the feeling that you get all the time. And yeah, we need to be a lot less precious.
This is the challenge of the attention economy, right? Like you do have to do things that are unexpected, off-brand, maybe like attention grabbing. I mean, like the workout, the Poilievre's workout video, like that is actually perfect. I mean, the message there is annoying. Like, sad about inflation. Did you do push-ups about it?
It's important for men.
That is how they would mock it, to be fair. That is like really good.
Yeah, it was very annoying. Yes. But let's talk about Poilievre a little bit. He had a really bad week. He had a very bad week. I was thinking about this and really, like, he had the big national stage with his convention and a beautiful result, right? Like any leader would love to have that result in terms of the support of his party. And yet the numbers since then have just tanked. And they seem to be getting worse. I mean, I don't know if we'll know definitively, in the next week or two, we probably will, as they go back into the House and a few other things happen there. It doesn't seem good for him that, his personal favorability is so low, in addition to there seems to be a party gap as well. So he busts out with his workout video this week. He has some internal problems with Jamil Javani, as we talked about. There's still the question for him on separatism, because at some point somebody's going to have to ask him, or what do you think about these guys who are going down to the States to start talking to the Americans about an Alberta military.
Yeah,
You're an
you
Alberta
would think so, right? That question would happen at some point.
like,
I've been
somebody put a
waiting.
microphone in front of him,
Like it's a
or
valid question, yeah.
just, I mean, hopefully, like, you know, even in rejoinders in QP, people start kicking the crap out of him there, because that's going to be tough for him, right? Because he's got some turnips in his caucus too that haven't quite put it together that they're going to lose their jobs if Alberta separates, including him.
Yeah.
We have to run in another seat.
Yeah. Just
But then they'll
like,
be like the ambassador to France or whatever. I don't know.
Just dial-
Maybe that's
like,
not an appealing post. Ambassador to
around. But
Hungary.
you were the first pollster, Kyla. I think you were on Hurley Burley when you talked about, and this was at like the height of Poilievre mania gripping the nation. When everybody was like swearing him into Rideau Cottage, and it was all great for him, and his numbers were fantastic. And I think you were the first person that I heard say it. You were like, women don't like this guy. They have there's some real weakness here. Like, tell me about what you were finding then, and is like, and what those seeds kind of portended for him.
Yeah, I mean, we were also distracted. One, his polling numbers, yes, but we were also distracted by how much people hated Justin Trudeau, right? And when you're in a narrative, God, is it hard? Like, it's impossible to get out of it. So you're just, and this is now what he's facing, which is like story after story. That's sort of in the Poilievre loser narrative, right? Like everything comes back to, so even if he does kind of a pivot or a different tactic, it's like, well, it's a desperate tactic to do this, you know? And like that is having been on kind of like the government side or been on the side when you're like, it doesn't matter what we do. Like it's a miserable existence, but that is sort of the existence he finds himself in right
Been
now.
there.
And like the data, but it's also like not untrue for the data, right? So it's really like it's kind of no win to a certain extent. So I can see why he's like, they seem a little bit like, I don't know, they don't want to overthink. Like they don't want to, they've done a lot of communication things that have had risk elements to them. And I don't think that that's necessarily a negative thing, but the workout video podcast, the Greco thing is another sort of like risky tactic, and then it changes how it's interpreted. Everything looks different when you're at the top. But anyways, back to your question about what was I seeing about Poilievre is even at that point in time, he was still polarizing. And which means that his very favorables and very unfavorables were basically identical, which is not usually the case for an opposition leader because people don't actually usually know who the opposition leader is really. And so it takes time for those negatives to climb up. And so when we're all thinking of, you know, Justin Trudeau with a very unfavorable in like the 60s, then like that's the story. But it's like, but also, and so, but also, you know, from the side of a voter, like what are they supposed to do? Not vote? Like, so they were to a certain extent parking their vote, and they were also being, to an extent, it put his negatives. It's like, I don't know, when you have a shitty boyfriend, but you haven't had a boyfriend in a while. So you're like, well, look, now that I know this experience
Summer
personally,
boyfriend.
but
We'll
look past some things for a little bit. Sorry.
Pierre
And,
Poilievre was a summer boyfriend for us. Is that what you're saying?
But like people, they just kind of were like, well, it's better than this other thing that I've had. So you kind of oversee it and then you take away the other thing. And it's like, oh, well, you know, there are these qualities that I don't like. I feel like I also tortured this analogy to death on the Hurley Burley when I did this. And David was just like, I'm not going there with you. Like, I don't know. There was this foundation to him, which like, I think that when things are not going your way in the horse race, you can sort of, psych yourself out into thinking like this thing that I see is not real or it's not working. And I think that was the case a lot with Trump, right? Like with his successes, then it made us all like very insecure of like, how do we go after this guy? But it was sort of the same for Poilievre, which is like his tone has always been an issue, or like his, you know, the asshole-ishness. Like it exists. Yeah. We're not crazy. We are not just like rabid leftists who just hate him personally. Like there's something there that people respond negatively to. But that's not it. Like that, I mean, that was the flaw that I identified at that point in time was like, there is a personality thing here. And then it also, so it was that plus then the skill set and competence. Like there's two parts to it. And when that was contrasted with Mark Carney, that also put it in a different perspective. So it's like, oh, you mean to tell me you're kind of a dick and you've never done anything outside of politics. Like in comparison to this guy who actually seems the way that young people, going back to young people, that the way that he often gets described in qualitative interviews is like a TV dad. So you're going to give me TV dad versus YouTube bro, and that contrast suddenly feels a little bit more clear.
That's exactly. But it's TV dad who's got like very strong accountant energy, right?
Yes.
He's going to take care of business.
Yeah, I have like a whole bank of great anecdotes from the campaign. I was on that campaign, of young women who are like, they were so good at doing this, but young women in focus groups who were like, he is like your best friend's dad who has a big job. You don't know what it is, but he'll always ask you about your day. Like it's stuff like that where I'm like, whoa, that's a picture, right? Like that explains it. And how differently that feels to someone who is a career politician with a chip on his shoulder and a harsh tone, right? Like that looks different.
Well, also like because he's gone into that like sort of terminally online stuff, like young people understand like the YouTube bro, and they understand that their whole like raison d'être is to kind of be a dick, right? And they know that archetype. Like they know it in their bones. It shows up in their algo. It's part of the discourse.
Well, I think it
So
also explains it a little bit of why it's interpreted, maybe not, simultaneously, like why it can be embraced or not responded to as negatively. Like going back to that 44% of young people that are kind of fine with either of them. Like he reads very differently for a young person than for a senior. Like he is not the masculine ideal, the leadership ideal of a boomer, man or woman. Like this is a very different portrayal of leadership, and Mark Carney actually fits that quite seamlessly. Like again, going back to like the kind of more respectful, like that it feels very different. Whereas young people, there might be like, especially young university educated women, like if there's an issue with young people, that's where it is. And so that's where you get like the scoffing, and you get some of the like, oh, like, you know, whatever, mocking of, let's say, the exercise video or whatever. But it also fits into a context for a lot of other young people where they don't really take that much issue with it. Like they don't really, or they don't notice, they don't see enough of it. And so when they do see it passively, it's like, well, I don't know, he's the guy talking about cost of living. And it's sort of a mix. So I don't know. It's kind of more complex. But
I think there's like a different quality to reasons that people don't like Poilievre's dickishness. Like sometimes we can recognize that a leader or a politician is kind of an asshole, but we like it,
Yeah.
right? Like I think that's what happened when we lost the election in Alberta. We did a tremendously good job of telling voters that Jason Kenney was a dick, and they were like, "Yeah, that's what we're here for.
We want a
Like,
dick."
yeah, we like that. But that was kind of the contrast with Trudeau, right? Is like, yeah, well,
Yeah.
Trudeau is soft. So
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of reasons why we lost that election. Anyway,
but also, well, to go back to like, you know, another NDP failure, I don't know. But like back to it all comes back to motivation, right? And I think for Poilievre, his dickishness can read as because it's politically motivated, right? Like I have this question that when Trudeau was still prime minister, but it must have been just after Trump won or looked like he was just about to win. I'm trying to think of when I did this poll. But it was just after he won. And then that was when the Trudeau team had like done the Mar-a-Lago trip, all of that. And I had one question that was like, Pierre Poilievre, like kind of agree or disagree. Pierre Poilievre cares more about Justin Trudeau losing than Canada winning. And that was like one entry point that I could finally start to see was like around that sentiment. Still not enough, but it was like getting at that point in time, like 50% agree, which like we can get anything above like 35, 40 or whatever. And it was like, okay, there's something to that, like that feeling around motivation and why you're there. And I do think like Tom Mulcair could have been like an asshole for a reason, but then they made him like a teddy bear and it was all weird. But he could have been a fighter, right? In that election. Like there's all these like, yeah, kind of strategic choices of like, what do you do with someone who is prickly?
yeah, he is. Okay, well, So this week, this coming week, we will have an Alberta budget, folks. We will have the fallout from a BC budget. The BC leadership continues on. The House resumes next week in the House of Commons, so we'll have plenty to talk about there. And Kyla, it has been wonderful to have you this week to talk about separatism, immigration, Jamil Javani, of course, because we can't quit that guy either.
And a lot of dicks.
And a lot of dicks. Just there were too many dicks on the dance floor this week.
My vocabulary is expansive.
To go back to an old Flight of the Conchords reference. Thanks for very much for joining us. We'll be back next week with Annalise. You've been listening to Balance of Power Pod. You can reach us at suggestionbox@balanceofpowerpod.ca. We always want to hear what you have to say. Our tech production is by Haxum. Our content production assistant is Sydney Whiting. And our music is by Shayla Miller.